fits Ishmael perfectly.
You're so close. It's like you almost get it. Because the context of the story explains why even though Ishmael exists, Isaac is called the only son here. Because in Genesis 15, the Lord promises Abram that he's going to bear a son. In Genesis 16, we see that Abram and Sarah don't trust God and take matters into their own hands and have Ishmael through Hagar.
Coley, aka Mr. Two Yahwehs, you completely blundered. Because when we look at Genesis 15, verse 4, like you brought up, all it says is, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. Nowhere does that indicate that it has to be from Sarah. It says it will be Abraham's flesh and blood. And then when we go to Genesis 16, you say that Abraham and Sarah, they don't trust God. You don't find that nowhere in the text. Nowhere in Genesis 15 or 16 do you find that Sarah and Abraham don't trust God. And it's funny because Sarah is the one who gives Hagar as a wife to Abraham. We see that in verse 4 of Genesis 16. So answer that, Coley.
This is not the son of promise from God. In Genesis 17, we do see God's promise fulfilled in Abraham and Sarah having Isaac. Because the son that God had promised to them in Genesis 15 was going to come by his power, not by theirs. How do we know that? Well, if we just keep reading Genesis 17, yes, God blesses Ishmael, but the covenant is to Isaac.
It's ironic that, Coley, you have the nerves to go to Genesis 17. Let's just look what it says earlier in the chapter, in verse 13. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Ishmael is a part of the circumcision covenant that, according to the text, is everlasting. Also, you say that Ishmael was given a great nation and he's still blessed. Please tell me, does it make sense that Abraham is praying to God that his son Ishmael become just great in numbers and not under God? Deuteronomy 4, verse 8 defines a great nation. God is promising to make Ishmael a great nation that is under God. So answer me this, Coley. When does Ishmael become a great nation since you brought up Genesis 17?
Another major issue. God promised Abraham in Genesis 17 that Isaac would have descendants before he was even born. If Isaac was guaranteed to live, then committing his sacrifice is not a real test because Abraham already knew he wouldn't lose it. A test only works if a person doesn't know the outcome.
No, it's called faith. Does he trust the outcome that God is saying is going to happen? He already didn't once. That's how Ishmael came about.
Wow, Coley, another blunder. You're talking about a test just means faith. Well, guess what? The promise in Genesis 17 was before Isaac was born. So clearly, after Abraham sees Sarah give birth to Isaac, you would think that his faith would go up, right? So it makes no sense. Stop blundering. A test means that Abraham does not know the outcome. It has nothing to do with faith in your ad hoc response.
That tells Abraham about Isaac and Ishmael's future descendants. This sequence is consistent and removes every contradiction.
Why is this guy talking about this? Would make the story make zero sense. Because as you already pointed out, Genesis 22 explicitly says that it's about Isaac. So how could it be about Isaac if you change the chronological order like you suggested if Isaac wasn't even born yet?
It makes perfect sense, Coley. That's the whole point. I am showing that there is corruption in the Genesis account. Because in Genesis 16, Abraham has no idea of the promise that Ishmael will become a great nation. Fast forward, Genesis 22, Ishmael has grown up. He is Abraham's only son. Therefore, Abraham goes to sacrifice him and does not know the outcome because that's what a true test is. Then in Genesis 17, Abraham is promised that Sarah will bear him a son called Isaac and Isaac will have descendants. It makes no sense if Genesis 17, Abraham is told Isaac will have many descendants and then he is tested to sacrifice Isaac as a son when he knows Isaac will have many descendants. It's not a test.
The type of wizardry that you have to conjure up to try to make this story about Ishmael.
There is no wizardry, Coley. You just can't track. You have a tracking problem. I showed you clear-cut contradiction in the Genesis account. But since you want to keep coping and giving ad hoc responses, I challenge you to a discussion. Let's discuss the sacrifice son. Let's discuss what a great nation is in Genesis 17 because you already ran from me when it came to Daniel 2.